Welcome back to Get a Grip on Lighting. On today's show, we have Scott Metker. He has more than 25 years' experience leading high tech organizations in both software and hardware development. His expertise spans the seamless integration of wireless devices and cutting edge cloud based software solutions, consistently driving innovative products to market. He stays at the forefront of the Internet of Things, IoT technologies, and notably, he recently spearheaded a team that clinched top honors in the prototype phase of the U.S. Department of Energy sponsored L Prize competition. He has a PhD in electrical engineering, specializing in wireless radio propagation. If you want to connect with him, there'll be a link to his LinkedIn in the show notes. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Autani. That's Autani.com and lighttrace.com. Actually, it's one or the other, but we'll talk to him about that in a second. Before we go there, though, Greg, we got to talk about the gangsters of lighting. Satco, go to satco.com for the gangsters.
That's right. You guys have heard long enough that they have just about everything you can imagine in lighting, and now they're coming out with their new Domino app. It's going to be a complete array of control modules for all different types of light fixtures. That's going to allow you the capability to do daylight harvesting, occupancy, vacancy sensing, scheduling, CCT, circadian rhythm programming, everything you want to do with a light fixture now, Satco's got for you on their Dominoes. Be ready for that thing. It's out and ready for you.
Satco is always doing the right thing with the light thing. The gangsters, go to satco.com. And hey, listen, this show is dropping. May 12th, Greg, is a deadline. I know it's not for the nailed convention. Everyone's complaining I'm talking too much about this controls course, the LSC, the LS Lighting Specialist in Controls, 3 live online sessions, and 3 days in person at Lightovation. Listen, you're distributors out there. You got light bulbs in a warehouse. You want to sell more lights? Guess what? You got to get in the controls game now. It's 2025, man. It ain't 2014 anymore. Wake up. Get your crap together and send one of your people or yourself to Lightovation. But the deadline's May 12th because we start on the 13th and we got 3 live online sessions that are hot. And then you go to Lightovation, you take an exam, and you come out with a certification, Greg Ehrich. Do you have light bulbs in a warehouse, Greg Ehrich?
I do. You do?
I do. So you got to go to NALD.org, your crucial shield, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, NALD.org. For folks who have light bulbs in a warehouse, this is your association. Scott Metker, welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast.
Thanks. It's great. It's great to be here.
So we've, sometimes our producer reaches out and finds guests, and other times we tell them we need to talk to somebody from this company. And you guys have been on my radar for a long time, but I need to get a better understanding first of who you guys are. What's the company name? Is it Autani? Is it Lighttrace? Is it both? How does the company work?
Currently the company name is Autani. We have essentially merged with Lighttrace. Lighttrace continues to be an OEM supplier. Autani has always been essentially a software development as well as an OEM ourselves, but our focus had always been on tier 3 and tier 4 analytics, focusing on bringing everything together within the building and then also bringing together multi-building views of all the data from IoT devices, whereas Lighttrace is focused more on the OEM market traditionally. And so as we've merged, we're not fully merged yet at this point. We continue to run separate operations, but there obviously is a great deal of crosstalk across our organization.
So what company are you with then?
So I am with Autani.
Autani, okay. And Lighttrace is coming in,
Yes.
and it's going to become Autani, the company name?
Well, technically speaking, we are going to be consolidating under the Lighttrace portfolio, and so Autani becomes a brand in the longer term play at that point.
Got it. And what other companies or branches are there within Lighttrace?
Well, there's traditional Lighttrace, which is again the OEM supplier. We also have new architectural lighting that we're spinning off, as well as emergency lighting under the Emerlight brand as well.
Emerlight, okay. And can you explain what? I know you guys have a number of different items, but I'm particularly interested in. I think it's the Lighttrace product, or I think it's the Autani product, but the product that gives you the capability to control light fixtures remotely.
Excellent. So that would be our Energy Center product, and that has been traditionally the Autani product, and that's what we're bringing all of the various Lighttrace essentially components onto that network. And so obviously, that product's been around since 2006. We've been around for quite some time. We originally started, ironically, in the thermostat space, and then we've moved traditionally into the lighting space over time. And then, of course, lighting has come to dominate that. We still do maintain some of those HVAC roots as well.
Got it. So right now, you guys are still doing HVAC, but they don't tie together. They're two different systems. The lighting versus the
Well,
HVAC.
actually, that's actually kind of interesting. The intent is no. So traditionally, Atani had always been selling our own lighting controls and as well as occupancy sensors and other sensors, and we were using that data to essentially directly drive occupied or unoccupied set points on traditional thermostats, wireless thermostats on the exact same network, and that's something we continue to do, in consolidation with Lighttrace. In fact, something we're very interested in. As of last year, DLC started pushing that as well to start saying, hey, perhaps we've started, sucking all of the savings we've got out of LED retrofits. I mean, I think you guys have alluded to that as well. We're starting to run out of things to retrofit at this point. So what is the next frontier? Some people are looking at controls as the next frontier, and DLC has been a little bit ahead of the curve, as they always are, and proposing that HVAC integration is going to be a very big deal as well. So how do you know if the building's empty? How do you know how much you should turn back those set points? And that can be a pretty big deal.
I got to take myself off mute there. Sorry about that. I don't mute myself very often, but I did there because I was listening. I was curious. I wanted to learn about the company. There's often we also, Greg and I are executive producers of the Lighting Controls podcast. We created it with Webster Marsh and Ron Kuzma to get that going, and we did it because the traditional lighting distributor, agent, contractor kind of looks at lighting controls as, I'd rather just sell the light fixtures. Controls are a hassle and this kind of thing, right? And so Webster's now putting on a course for everybody. But there seems to be it's almost like we're even though it feels like we've been working on getting controls right for 25 years in lighting, and it's never really taken off. It feels like there's a coming battle between HVAC control systems, which are already in the building, being used and operating, and whereas lighting control systems are often in the building and not being used and overridden. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but old lighting control systems are hassly and fussy and all that. Is there going to be a battle between HVAC controls and lighting controls for the building space, or are the two going to merge into one?
I think the two are going to merge into one. I mean, I think, right now it's an interesting time to be a facility manager. Right now you've obviously got this portfolio of different systems that you maintain. And you're exactly right. There are a lot of abandoned lighting controller systems, or, fundamentally, once people get things configured the way they want, they tend not to touch them anymore. One of the early value propositions we saw in using lighting in that interface was taking our occupancy data and feeding it to essentially the HVAC system in larger buildings. So you might have a large system, building that has a very sophisticated HVAC system beyond the type and kind that we might service, as an example. But they only have a certain density of occupancy data. They might have one or two aux sensors near a thermostat or near a control unit, telling them whether that space is utilized or not, or they're going to have to do a separate set of occupancy sensors to truly tell whether the space is utilized. And what a lot of people in that space have realized is, in these lighting retrofit projects, they can now be asking us for that data, and they can tie it right into their head-end system and start using that to drive building behaviors. And that's one perfect example where, it really is a good marriage of, these are sensors that are already deployed. They're part of the lighting system. They're part of, good energy codes, turning the lights on and off. And traditionally, potentially, those hadn't been utilized by the people who are running the most expensive function of the building, which is heating and cooling. At some point, particularly with LED retrofits, we've pulled the energy savings so that, we are 5 to 10, 15% of the building budget, depending on what type of building you are. But HVAC is going to be, at least 70% plus of that, and depending where you are, even more. So, that's good data. And that's one of the things people have realized is, I don't think it's competitive in any way, shape, or form. I think those facility managers are looking to grab any set of data they can, as long as they're dealing with systems that integrate nicely. That's really becoming the thing that is driving controls, is not just, you have a controls head end, but can I talk to your controls head end and do efficient things?
There's one of the guys that Greg and I were coming up. We met him at a nailed convention. His name was Nito Kubain, and he, he's a consultant and speaker, but I thought he was really great. He had a line that said, I'll never forget it: change cannot occur until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. Have we reached the point where, leaving HVAC systems on 24 hours, leaving storefront signs on at 3 o'clock in the morning, leaving lights on? I mean, we've all drive on highways and see lights on in commercial buildings all the time, and late at night. Have we reached the pain point where the cost of that energy justifies the sensors without rebate?
I think when you start tying in the HVAC advantages, absolutely. And I think you guys have talked about it as well. We've reached the point where certainly these systems pay for themselves. It's simply a question then of the time. Is it a 1 year payback, a 2 year payback, a 5 year payback? Traditionally we've seen that the tolerance for paybacks is going to be anywhere from 2 to 4 years, but people generally want a fast payback. What we're seeing, however, is we're seeing people, particularly in long-term energy performance contracts, willing to tolerate things over longer intervals. And we're also seeing, again, that sensor fusion point that you're talking about, where you're bringing in that OCT data from the lighting system into HVAC. You can justify a lot more. The only catch in that process, and we've talked about it a great deal ourselves, is when you start bringing in HVAC, it's more difficult to measure what you saved. It's pretty easy with lighting because you can compare it to a baseline. I can take
Sure.
how long were the lights on before, how long were they on after. But if you had a cold winter this season, your system might be more expensive. And so then you get into all sorts of more advanced modeling, and that's really been a challenge in the industry. And HVAC has a ton of modeling, and they can do those things. But to the average customer, to the average facility manager, I don't think necessarily those messages play well. How do you justify capital expenditure if you can't truly tell me what you're saving in HVAC? And that's where we've seen DLC jump in. We've seen a number of government resources posting various baselines and metrics for the average savings you'll see. I mean, I've seen a number of reports that talk about for office buildings, you can expect to see this. For buildings that are in commercial sales, you'll expect to see that. And all of those assets really help the industry as a whole, both lighting and HVAC, sell those things to end users who will save money, but are having a more difficult time justifying that to the investors.
Yeah, the savings from LED, or even going back to T8 or T5 fluorescent, are very simple. You have 168-watt fixture, you now have a 90-watt fixture, right?
There you go.
It's a simple calculation. With controls, are there any parts of Autani or light trace software that actually calculates the savings and how long lights have been off for and how long the space has been occupied?
I mean, we have every piece of data for, literally, 5 minutes or less intervals for every light in the entire building. So absolutely, yes. The real question comes down to is, did you bother to do a baseline in those projects? And for a lot of smaller and medium-sized projects, no one's doing a baseline. No one's saying, hey, the lights were on this much before. We did have one customer, and it was fascinating, where they already had our system. So they were already in a control system, but they had originally gone with the goal of essentially running a time clock. They simply wanted a better time clock. However, we had installed occupancy sensors for that customer. Years later, they asked us to come in and help them deploy essentially, schedules that employed both time clock and occupancy. The month that feature was turned on, that customer saved 33% lighting. And so it's rare that you get those kinds of immediate baselines. So I'm not saying controls save 33%. They save a lot more. But this customer made one behavior change, and we could compare the before and after, and that was truly fascinating. And that's, when we see certain rebate programs, that's what we're seeing a lot of demand in the Northeast and other areas of the country, here in the US, where people are asking for a lot more data than they used to ask for. We're getting regularly asked to turn over 15-minute lighting intervals for every fixture in the building for some of the rebate programs. And as you guys have alluded to, a lot of those rebate programs are potentially coming to an end, or at least becoming more sophisticated in what they ask for. So as they transition from just being lighting retrofits to lighting retrofits plus controls, and now they're saying lighting retrofits plus controls plus some sort of central governance capacity in that building, some sort of head-end unit. They're then saying, hey, show me the data that shows you save money. And what we've been doing is we've been also combining lighting gains along with HVAC gains in customized rebates. So, I mean, a lot of the rebates you guys talk about are prescriptive rebates. I replaced this many watts with that many watts. In the custom rebate scenario, you measure a building, you go in and make a prediction of what you'll save, and you're taking energy metering before and after. And that's also a good opportunity. Now, that does require that you're working with a partner who is more used to those types of rebates. But as a very long answer to your question, have people pushed past the pain points, some of these other things? I think to push past those pain points, you have to have measured in the first place.
So, okay,
So
I'm going to jump in one more question here before I
yeah,
throw it back
yep.
to Greg. I would say that most people in my career, Greg and I have sold thousands and thousands of rebate-based projects. I would say that the rare customer verifies the energy savings. And
For sure.
there's a cost to verification, and sometimes it's very high, and sometimes it's not so high. You can look at some hydro bills, and you can tell right away if it's a warehouse, you can see a spontaneous load reduction the next month. In a manufacturing plant where lighting is a very small amount of the electricity, it can be hard to find those savings, even though cash-wise they can be enormous. But I've always struggled with the verification side of the savings. And I feel like if I was a customer, I wouldn't believe the software I was sold. I would turn to the hydro bills and I would say, I want you to show me on my electricity bill how I'm saving. Is there a way to integrate those two things, or a way to plug those electricity bills so that it's a third party verification? If you do a baseline, give me 12 months of bills, or 36 months of bills, we plug them in, and then after the project, we plug them in after. Do you have that capability within the software?
Well, within the software, we're able to bring in meters. So we can meter at the building level, or we can pull in meters at the panel level. Typically, we'll do it at the meter level
Mhm.
to do exactly that assessment you want. Now, we aren't necessarily directly in the software saying, hey, you had this before and hit one button and you see this after. What we're usually doing is exporting a great deal of data. And then usually our partners, various energy service companies, are then simply running a simple spreadsheet, because once you have the data in a tabulated fashion, you can pretty easily go through it and see those reductions. It also gets very interesting, and one thing we haven't mentioned here is simply demand reduction as well, which is becoming quite important in certain areas of the country. So it's not just pure energy savings. We have a lot of customers who are interested in these systems because lighting may not be the biggest load in the building, but it is the most agile load in the building.
Mhm.
I can turn the lights to half dim in non-emergency spaces and non-egress spaces instantly. And so there's a lot of value in doing that, and that's where people have talked about various forms of load and curtailment, using systems like ours. So the short answer is yes. Where it gets really interesting is how you're going to crunch the data, and also more importantly, who's going to look at it. So individual building owners might not necessarily be looking at that, but we are seeing the utilities start to collect the data. One of the questions that we have asked, the utilities in some cases, and we haven't always received direct feedback, is say, what are you doing with all that data we're giving you? And we're seeing the rebates become, particularly in the custom space, a lot more specific about what you need to provide. Again, we'll walk out and hand over 500 megabyte files of everything within a 5-story building, after a 2-month assessment, and it's just a big pile of numbers. I mean,
Mhm.
it's clearly organized, and someone who knows what they're doing could go through it. The question is, will someone? And I think what the energy companies and utility companies are going through is that they're building essentially that repository of data to help them understand the effectiveness of future programs that they propose. So rebates aren't necessarily going away, but they're transforming in what they're asking. And if you don't have these types of kinds of systems, you won't be able to apply for them.
Sure. One stat you said that has stuck out with me, and I don't know why I never really thought about it, but I've done some presentations on lighting, why it's important to do energy upgrades, whatever it is. And I have this pie chart from, I don't know, 2007 that says lighting accounts for 30 to 40% of the building's energy use. And you said earlier it's now at 5 to 10. I got to change that
Yeah,
pie
I mean,
chart.
depending on the building. Yeah, well, I mean, it depends what the building
Yeah.
does, of course. But yeah, I would certainly suggest that in many buildings it's far below 30. I mean, the LED retrofit, made the energy, that you can save through lighting controls. It reduced that
Mhm.
energy, and now you're taking a percentage of a percentage. So, let's say you were at 30%, and now you've reduced it to 15%. Now you're trying to, let's
Totally.
say you can save 60%. You're saving 60% of that remaining 15, and so you're getting some diminishing returns. And so when people look at lighting systems, we often justify them and benefits that go beyond pure energy. We think the energy is important. We think demand reduction is very important. We think telling you what's going on with your buildings is significantly important. I mean, when we dealt with COVID over the years, one of the things that our customers first asked us when COVID first occurred was, how can I get a better handle on what's going on in my buildings? And we said, well, you can use our system to even tell who's in the building, or at least how quickly people are sweeping through at various times. And so, their space analytics, again, the ability to look at how one thing affects another, demand reduction and agile demand reduction is particularly important.
So one of the things we talk a lot about with lighting controls, and the issue with it is that everybody's got their own system, right? And it's common knowledge in the lighting industry that there are multiple companies that have something kind of similar, and it's from you guys. And we're not going to get into names, but um, that's important to the lighting industry, uh, because that makes it interoperable. So now it's not saying, you can only give this one brand and that's all you can deal with. You can do multiple. So can you explain to us a little bit about your strategy there and what you guys do with that on your lighting
Well,
system?
I mean, and it really starts to matter a lot when it comes to, again, what I call tier three and tier four. And for everyone that might not use that terminology, I'm talking about systems that essentially aggregate all of the particular rooms in a building to a building wide view. And then above that, when you look at analytics, you're looking at even cross building visibility. You're looking at, for instance, an entire portfolio. And so, when you talk about, essentially that either kind of future proofing or the idea that there's, cross compatibility. So our platform, Energy Center, can be used by any one of the OEM vendors that we work with to essentially provide that benefit to their customers. Now, I think we want to be very sensitive to who and how we're marketing those things. I mean, that's their marketplace, and we're simply a supplier. But the value proposition of having a shared platform means that platform is stronger as a whole. The other benefit, particularly when you look at cybersecurity, when you look at all the things that happen when you bring in cloud software and start doing data at scale, it becomes very important that people know that supplier isn't necessarily, someone who is focusing, let's say, on pure lighting manufacture, that you're actually dealing with a company that does software for a living. And that's also one of the reasons for our strategy, really going down that path, which is to say, the Autani Energy Center software is something that OEMs can take advantage of, that people, are able to use that software and know that you have a single name and a single place that is responsible essentially for managing the various certifications, both not just of the individual firmware components, but the cloud-based access to your building.
Right. And, again, without giving out any secrets of anybody, but are people able to take that and then just tweak it to little degrees to make theirs just a little different? Like different things? Is that how it
It,
works on this? Yeah.
So traditionally on the Energy Center platform, we have not been tweaking that for our customers. Again, because it's one of those ideas that you're already dealing with a smaller community within a much larger community, and that suddenly, if you're maintaining potentially a very small group of people who, at least initially as you start out, who are going to require tailored training, a completely different user interface, some of those other things, that might not necessarily scale well or be a good entrance point. It isn't to say that, this is the way it's going to be in the long term, but we do think it's kind of valuable to have a consistent experience, at least when you're looking at the data and trying to explore it.
How do you address people that, or sorry, Mike?
Oh, you go. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, just see the wireless control versus wired in control. Mike has been a big proponent of wired because we know it's going to work. Your stuff is wireless. Is that the way that everybody's going to go in the future? Is that where we should go?
And I wouldn't necessarily even say that all of our stuff is wireless. I mean, like even within many wireless systems, right, there are components that are wired. And essentially the question is how far do you want to send a wireless signal? And if you're trying to send all of your data across a wireless signal everywhere at all times, maybe that's a house of cards. What we've always believed is if you're trying to turn the lights in a room, 20 feet away, wireless makes a great deal of sense. And I think I've heard you guys refer to the point that if you have to sit there and essentially run traveler wires, up and down to various, to switches, to run up to the ceiling, run up to a J-box and bring them over, that starts to get expensive really quick. And so what we're trying to do is provide options that let people wire buildings, or not wire them very quickly, both during retrofit and new construction. But when you look at, for instance, our strategy for bringing all that data back and controlling the building as a whole, we actually do have some wired infrastructure there. And we use that for the high bandwidth part of the application. We're starting to bring all of the data. It might be 5,000 individually controlled fixtures in a building. You don't necessarily want to send that data all over the air. What we're doing is we're just taking the local signals and then we're bringing that to kind of the high-speed express. And that high-speed express is the wired network. So I'd like to think that we do both.
The value of the data in and of itself, I've often contended that that there'll be increasing value to the data as the ability of lighting systems to, like you said, know who's in the space by gait recognition or facial recognition or something like this, where you'll walk into the airport and never mind a real ID or anything, the airport will know who you are and that you're a valid traveler or whatever just by as you enter the airport. And my belief is that this will come from lighting systems. Lighting systems will be the base of this type of advancement. How far are we away? You take a company like Google or whatever. They're selling data. Facebook is selling your data. That's what they're doing. Are we going to be in a reality where the data is worth more than the lighting system? where people will actually pay for lighting systems to go into large facilities in order that they can receive the data?
We certainly know that, particularly when we try to sell to some higher tech companies, and when we look at large, the Googles, the Apples, all of the targets for that people try to sell very high tech solutions into, because they're interested in mining that data themselves, because they are high tech themselves. When we have discussions with organizations like those companies, we find that, I think what you're saying, they are more receptive to that. They've at least applied it a value. Is that value the equivalent of the lighting? We know that if you didn't have the data tomorrow, and yet if all the lights turned off, I know which one would disturb the average user first, but there certainly is a huge value in it. I do recall that, this is probably about 2 or 3 years ago. I was having a discussion with one of the large, property management firms, one of the big ones, and I was discussing their use of time domain databases and how, they use those databases to optimize data storage and what they did with the data. And one of the questions I asked them was, what were the retention rules they were using for their data? And I don't know if you guys have seen how much data a building can generate, but it's a lot. If you look at every light, just every fixture in the building, every 5 minutes recording a dim state, and potentially you might have a temperature sensor on board or other things, you add that up, compound it over time, and then multiply by a suite of buildings, and it's a non-trivial amount of data. But what's happened is that cloud storage and other things have certainly caught up. That big data is much smaller, than it used to be, or big data has to be a lot bigger before it actually becomes big data anymore, and it's a lot cheaper. And the answer from that particular person about their retention rules was, he said, we don't have them. He said, we never throw away data. We don't keep it for 5 years or 15 or 10. We just keep it all. And, there's this whole concept of serendipity. When you're using systems like this, and later on you want to do an assessment of the baseline of the building, we started this conversation with saying, hey, it's very difficult to justify rebates when you don't have certain kinds of data. You can go back and infer a great deal of data if you just knew occupancy patterns and lighting patterns. And so that also can feed into predictive models in the future of deciding whether to fund certain kinds of projects. Now, I'm not targeting an individual facility manager here. I'm targeting, the big groups that do property management across large, essentially portfolios. And those groups are the ones that I think, are going to be driving a lot of things you talk about in terms of the value of the data, because they have certain goals, like every year I have to save another percent. Every year I have to squeeze a little harder. And when they have access to these tools, that's a pretty big, value to add to their portfolio.
Final question related. Well, I don't know if it's going to lead to something else, but when you're talking about this sale, you're talking about a significant sale. Like even a medium-sized commercial building would be a nice sale for if you were to incorporate controls into a retrofit and get a rebate or whatever. And you're looking at specification, you're looking at distribution, you're looking at contracting, you're looking at configuration, integration of the controls. Are we, and just a little plug, nail.org, check out Lighting Specialist Controls, taught by Webster Marsh. We're going to go into all three of those areas. But are we going to see the emergence of a new kind of lighting sales professional, somebody or a lighting company or controls company that's going to come forward and look at a building with the owners of the building, with the facility managers, and say, look, this is how this entire process works, from the design phase through all the way through to the post-sale service rebate and then ongoing support. And this is how you're going to do it. And that customer is going to stay with you, not because they buy light bulbs from you, but because you are supporting their software installation. Is that a new kind of emerging sort of profession, company, or whatever in the lighting industry, or does it already exist?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think it's certainly emerging. I think in certain industry sectors, it's already emerged, and it is a little more mature. I've had a number of inquiries from healthcare, and you actually have those types of people in healthcare who are consulting and essentially working with groups of hospitals, groups of clinics to exactly answer those questions you're talking about, the full life cycle of bringing new technologies into a building for the purposes of everything from their core function in terms of serving health, as well as just true facility management type goals. So I feel like some sectors have that already. And then the other piece is within just generalized lighting. I've started to see, essentially with both sales agencies as well as in distribution, you're starting to get these expert controls groups, and that some of the larger distribution groups or some of the more specialized ones are starting to carve out, essentially groups of people who are control savvy. And I think you guys have talked a lot in your podcast simply about the difficulties of training those groups and bringing them up to speed. I mean, it's not easy to stay abreast of this, particularly when the industry changes every 5 years. But those groups are themselves jumping out. What I sometimes wonder about is, will those groups permanently remain within those those agencies, within distribution, within the sales agencies, or will they start spinning off as spin-offs? I'm not clear yet whether that's happening. So we don't see a lot necessarily of the complete independence in the general lighting space, but like I said, in specialized we do.
Yeah, in the specification grade new construction, for sure that exists. The if you're talking about a major massive properties like the First Canadian Place or the Mall of America in Minnesota, or these types of really high end properties, they're going to bring in a serious. They can afford a team of professionals, but the real deployment is going to be in the buildings a little bit smaller than that, and then lower, where you're going to see. I think you're going to see massive uptake. Scott Metker, do you have any final thoughts or for distributors and contractors, agents, designers, the people that listen to Get a Grip on Lighting from time to time? Do you have any final thoughts about the future of lighting controls and what they need to know, besides signing up for Nailed's LSC in Lightivation, deadline May 12th?
Well, really the main thing is looking above and beyond just thinking about the pure rebate. I'm not saying that, don't go for the rebate. What I'm saying is it's important in your conversations, particularly with end users, particularly with buyers, is to start looking at, there's a lot of data that's going to be gathered. That data can be used to combine with your HVAC and save money. That data can be used to justify further expenditure, and there's a serendipity there, which is to say that once you have that data, you can start, essentially being more future-proof because you have a knowledge of how your building performed over time. These buildings have lives of their own. It's important that we actually understand and at least some of the things that are going on. How occupied was the building? You can tell these basic things by looking at some of the occupancy data, it really in any large scale system, and learn a great deal. And so I would urge people to think just beyond the pure lighting. Find a system that does what you want, but make sure it is future proof in terms of being able to give you clear access to the data you've gained.
Folks, you're a distributor out there. Those facility managers. You got to go talk to them and talk to them about lighting controls. There are rebates, I know, in my market for this that are significant. I'm sure, Greg, I don't know what's happening in Minnesota with that, but it's probably the same thing. Minnesota and Ontario are kind of progressive markets in that regard. But, I know Satco's got light bulbs in a warehouse, Greg, and they got their new Domino system coming out, I heard. Is that a fact?
That's a fact, buddy. A mesh hub-free wireless control solution with embedded motion and daylight sensors that can go in many of their in-stock fixtures. That means LLLC, I think it's called, Luminaire Level Lighting Control. You can now get, and then it's app-based, and you can do all the fun things you need with Satco and Domino.
And the first certification for lighting controls is being brought to you by Nailed, LS-C, taught by Webster Marsh, Ron Kuzma from the Lighting Controls podcast, and one other fella. I can never remember that guy's name, but I love you, buddy. I'm going to shake your hand one day. We're going to have a beer together, all that kind of stuff. I just always forget your name when I'm on the show here. Reaching for it, forget it. But go to nailed.org and check it out. Do you have light bulbs in a warehouse? You got light bulbs in a warehouse? What are you doing? This is your association. You're either a vendor or you're a distributor of the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Greg, but I forgot. I don't think this is going out before Light Fair. Is it dropping before Light Fair, Scott, or Monday? It's dropping Monday. I'll be already at Light Fair because, I'll already be there. So if you are not there, well, you're not one of the top G's like me, Greg, Devin, Corey, Brian, Spencer, all the top guys in Nailed. Be there, be square, May 4th through 8th, Las Vegas. Talk to you soon, guys.